My name is Sylvia Harper. I am 67 years old, a retired librarian who once spent her life among shelves of quiet books, whispers of knowledge, and the small comfort of order in an unpredictable world. I raised a son, Michael, with everything I had, and when my husband passed a decade ago, I thought my role was to simply stand in the background and cheer for the family I had left. But life has a way of testing the silent ones, those of us who never shout, who never demand. That is why this story begins with a gift. A simple birthday gift wrapped in elegant paper, tied with a ribbon that looked expensive enough to cover its emptiness. My daughter-in-law, Claire, handed it to me with a smile that never touched her eyes. Inside was a specialty coffee box, imported, dark roast, the kind of thing meant to impress. I did not think much of it at first. That night, I placed it on the counter beside my white porcelain cup, the cup I have used for 30 years. It was waiting for me, like a promise. The following morning, the phone rang. Claire's voice came through, honeyed but sharp at the edges. She asked, almost too eagerly, "So, how was the drink?" I remember I answered with a kind of casual honesty that only comes when you no longer expect much from others. "Oh," I said lightly, "I handed it over to your mother. She really loved it." There was silence on the line, long, heavy silence. I could almost hear her breathing, shallow, panicked. And then, her voice cracked open. She shouted, "You gave it to her?" The words slammed into my ear like a door shut too hard. I set my porcelain cup onto its saucer, the thin ring of sound ringing through my kitchen. Ting, cold and metallic, though it was only clay. My hand trembled slightly, and in that still moment, as the echo of her shock filled the silence, a thought rose in me, quiet but piercing. If I had drunk that coffee last night, there would be no voice telling you this story today. I let the silence stretch between us. She filled it with frantic stammering, excuses that made less and less sense the longer she spoke. I listened, but I said nothing. Sometimes silence has more weight than words. I ended the call softly, pressing my thumb to the red button, the way I once pressed my finger to close the back cover of a book I knew I could never unread. I stood there in my kitchen, looking at the porcelain cup, white, unmarked, ordinary. Yet in that moment it became something else entirely, a symbol of fragility, of resilience, of how close life can hover to the edge without anyone noticing. This was not just about coffee. It was about what lies beneath the gestures we pretend are kind. It was about the quiet battles that mothers fight when their children no longer see them as the center, but as the leftover. I did not scream. I did not accuse. I simply knew. And in that knowing, everything began to change. If you have ever received a gift that carried more weight than it appeared, if you have ever felt the sting of being treated as though your presence no longer mattered, then perhaps you will understand the journey I'm about to share. Because that morning, when Claire shouted in disbelief, was the morning I stopped being invisible. It was the morning I realized silence could be sharper than any blade, and it was the morning I decided that my life, fragile as porcelain, was still mine to guard. And so I ask you, as you listen to what came after, stay with me. This story is not only mine, it might be yours too. If you have ever stood quietly in the corner of your own family, if you have ever wondered whether your sacrifices were seen or forgotten, then I invite you to walk beside me now. Because what began with a box of coffee turned into something no one in my family could have imagined. My 67th birthday arrived like a whisper, not a celebration. The house was still, the kind of stillness that almost hums in your ears when no one is speaking. I had baked a small cake for myself earlier in the day, more out of habit than joy. The smell of vanilla clung faintly to the walls, but it was fading by the time the doorbell finally rang. Michael arrived late, as always these days. His excuse floated out of him before I could even ask. Work, traffic, the baby. I nodded, because what else could I do? A mother learns early how to take crumbs and call it bread. Behind him came Claire. She moved with the confidence of someone who knows the room tilts toward her. She carried a box wrapped in thick cream paper, tied with a satin ribbon too perfect to be casual. She held it out like she was presenting me with a crown, her smile wide enough to pass as warmth if you didn't look closely. "Happy birthday, Sylvia," she said. Her tone was polished, like glass, fragile but cutting. I accepted the gift with both hands. The paper crinkled softly, releasing the faint scent of ink and glue. The ribbon was smooth, cool against my fingers, like it belonged more to a store display than to me. Inside, I found the specialty coffee box, imported. Bold lettering promised richness, depth, elegance, the sort of gift that speaks loudly of taste, though not necessarily of thought. "Thank you," I said, carefully polite. My words hung in the kitchen light, polite but empty. Michael kissed my cheek quickly, his lips barely brushing my skin. He was already reaching for his phone, scrolling with the same ease he once reserved for conversation with me. The glow from the screen lit his face more than the kitchen lamp above us. I placed the coffee box beside my porcelain cup, white, plain, a cup I had bought decades ago at a thrift shop when money was tight. It had survived moves, storms, mornings of grief, evenings of laughter. Its glaze was chipped at the rim, but it was mine. Beside it, the glossy coffee box looked almost arrogant, too loud in my quiet kitchen. Dinner was short, conversation even shorter. They asked how I was feeling, a question that didn't wait for an answer. They knew about my heart condition. Everyone knew. It had been years since the diagnosis. A weak valve, medication each morning, and an unspoken fear that hovered like dust you could never quite wipe away. They knew. And yet, they didn't linger. The kitchen light flickered once, briefly. It cast their shadows against the wall, stretched and strange, as though we were strangers gathered in the wrong house. Claire complimented the curtains, something she had mocked before. Michael checked the clock twice in 10 minutes. They left with promises that sounded rehearsed. "We'll call soon. Next weekend. Maybe dinner." Words like receipts, thin proof of a purchase never meant to be used. The door closed and silence reclaimed the house. I stood there with the coffee box still resting by my cup. The ribbon gleamed under the light, too bright against the worn wood of my counter. I sat at the table, the cake untouched, its frosting slightly melting. The air smelled of sugar and paper, sweet but hollow. My chest felt heavy, not with illness, but with absence. Birthdays are supposed to echo with voices, with laughter. Mine echoed with the ticking of the kitchen clock, steady, merciless. I reached for the porcelain cup, running my thumb along its rim. The tiny chip caught against my skin, a small reminder of years lived, a reminder that things break, but they still hold. I wondered for a moment if anyone in that house remembered the nights I stayed awake with Michael, when he was a boy with fevers, or the afternoons I skipped meals so he could have a full plate. Sacrifices fade in memory faster than ribbons unravel. The coffee box remained unopened. Its weight seemed unnatural, as if it carried more than beans. I thought about making a cup, just to honor the gesture, but something in me resisted. My heart thudded, slow and deliberate, as though it too sensed something wrong. So I left it where it was, untouched, beside the porcelain cup that had always been faithful. That night, I climbed into bed alone. The house creaked as it always did, the walls groaning like old bones. I closed my eyes and prayed for strength, not just for my heart, but for the silence I knew would follow. Because birthdays, in this family, were no longer about celebration. They were about endurance. And the box on the counter, waiting in the dark, would soon reveal far more than anyone had intended. The porcelain cup sat where I had left it, near the unopened coffee box. Its white surface caught the faint glow of the kitchen light, as though it were keeping watch. My hand hovered above it, fingers brushing the rim, and in that moment the years folded back on themselves like pages turned too quickly. I was no longer 67, standing alone in a kitchen too quiet. I was 32, with my hair tied back, apron dusted with flour. The same cup sat before me, steaming with hot cocoa I had made for Michael after a day of running through the yard. He had been 7 then, cheeks flushed with the kind of joy only children know. He clutched a drawing in his small hands, a scribble of our house, a sun larger than the roof, and me holding his hand. That was his birthday gift to me. No ribbon, no shiny paper, just color pressed too hard by crayons, edges curling from his grip. And yet that picture had been enough to warm me for years. Thematic echo lingered. Back then, just one drawing was enough. I could still hear him slurping the cocoa from the porcelain cup, leaving a ring of chocolate on the rim. He had laughed when I wiped it clean, saying the cup was too fancy for him, but I told him, "Everything tastes better when you know it's made with love." He had nodded solemnly, as though memorizing a secret. The memory shifted, and suddenly my husband's laughter filled the room. Robert was alive then, his voice deep and steady, the anchor of our family. He teased me for fussing too much over birthdays, but he always made sure there were candles, and he always sat beside me as Michael sang off-key. Those nights were noisy, cluttered with voices, and heavy with love. Now the only sound was the paper crinkling from the gift Claire had left. That glossy wrapping seemed to mock me, its perfection covering emptiness. The kitchen smelled faintly of glue and expensive roast, but none of it carried the warmth of cocoa powder and melting marshmallows. I blinked back into the present. My fingers curled tighter around the cup. Its small chip grazed against my skin, reminding me it had survived longer than most things. The house around me felt larger, lonelier. The once shared table now seemed too wide. Even the cake on the counter looked embarrassed, as though ashamed of being untouched. I let the flashback settle, then asked myself quietly, how had we come here? When did gifts turn from drawings and laughter to polished boxes meant for display? When did birthdays shift from being about us to being about appearances? The porcelain cup offered no answer. It only held the weight of memory, pressed into its glaze by decades of mornings and nights. I thought of Robert again. He would have hated the silence that now filled the house. He believed in noise, in family pressing close. His absence had not only stolen a man, but also the glue that held the pieces together. After his passing, every gathering had grown thinner, like soup watered down. I brushed the ribbon of the coffee box, its slickness foreign against my calloused fingertips. It carried no fingerprints of love, no marks of thought, just a transaction disguised as a gift. And yet, I told myself, perhaps Claire had meant well. Perhaps she had thought the box was special, that it would impress. But my heart, weak though it may be, still knew the difference between affection and obligation. I closed my eyes. Michael's voice as a boy echoed faintly, "Happy birthday, Mommy." He had sung loud, fearless, even when off-key. That was love. That was family. I opened my eyes again to silence. The box sat gleaming. The cup sat faithful. One was weighty with meaning. The other was empty despite its shine. It struck me then that the cup, chipped and plain, was more beautiful than any polished box, because it carried history, it carried truth. I whispered into the quiet room, not to anyone but myself. Back then, just a drawing was enough. The words floated and settled, pressing into the still air like a vow. The kitchen clock ticked on. My heart followed its rhythm, slow but steady. Somewhere in that steady beat, I understood. This birthday was different, not because of what I had received, but because of what I remembered, and the porcelain cup, resting patiently by my hand, promised to carry me through whatever came next. I woke before the sun, the kitchen still smelling faintly of vanilla and paper. The coffee box sat beside my white porcelain cup. Two objects that did not belong to the same story. I wiped the counter as if tidying my thoughts, slid the box into a reusable bag, and felt the ribbon hiss across my palm. Dawn was thin and pink. My breath made small clouds as I walked to the car. I told myself a plain truth I could say without hurting anyone. My heart does not do well with caffeine. Helen loves coffee. Let the gift find the person it fits. Helen lives 7 minutes away in a brick bungalow with green shutters. When she opened the door, she smelled of lemon cleaner and hand cream. We are not best friends, but we keep a soft truce that mothers understand. "Sylvia, what a surprise," she said. "Come in. It is too chilly to stand at the door." The hallway held family photos. Claire at 10 with skinned knees, Claire at the wedding holding white lilies. Something tightened in my chest that was not illness, it was memory. I followed Helen to the kitchen. I set the bag on the table and drew out the box. The paper gleamed under the lamp. "For you," I said. "My heart does not do well with caffeine. The doctor still reminds me. You drink coffee. You should enjoy this more than I would." Her eyes widened with the pleasure of being considered. "For me, really? Are you sure?" "I am sure," I said. "It would sit on my counter and gather dust." She traced the ribbon. "It is beautiful. I have never had anything like this." She studied my face. "May I make us a cup?" I shook my head. "Tea for me, if you have it. I am minding my heart." "Of course," she said. The kettle filled. Steam rose when it met the burner. She set chamomile on the table. "I keep this for quiet evenings. This feels like one." While the water heated, we admired the box as people admire a new book. She read the tasting notes: cocoa, cedar, dark cherry. Watching her happiness, I felt lighter. The gift had found its owner. She poured my tea and we sat. Her kitchen kept the ordinary parts of a life: crocheted doilies, a calendar, a small fruit bowl. The kettle clicked as it cooled. Somewhere a clock chimed the half hour. "I hope you had a good birthday," she said. "It was quiet," I answered. "Quiet can be a blessing. Sometimes it is just quiet." She nodded, understanding more than the words. For a moment, the house felt like a harbor rather than a place people rush through. When it was time to go, she walked me to the door with the box in her hands like a bouquet. "Thank you," she said. "I will brew a cup this afternoon and think of you." "Think of yourself when you drink it," I said. "Let it be your treat." The sentence surprised me with its firmness. I am learning to give without erasing myself. On the porch, the air had brightened. As I drove away, a roast scent rose from the bag I had carried. It had clung to my coat. It followed me like a question. Back home, I washed my porcelain cup by hand, small circles. The cup clicked against the sink, a humble sound that belongs to the living. I dried it and set it in its usual place. I lifted my phone, considered texting Claire and Michael to thank them, considered telling them how kind Helen had been. My thumb hovered. Then I set the phone down. Some words arrive better later. Some do not need to arrive at all. I opened the back door and let the morning in. Cool air moved across the floor like a quiet tide. I stood there feeling both small and in charge of my own smallness. Giving the box away felt right-sized, not dramatic, not cruel, just honest. In the stillness that followed, I made a vow I did not speak. I would honor my heart and the life it keeps, beginning with little choices: one white cup, one careful morning, one gentle boundary at a time. The phone rang just after noon, its sharp tone slicing through the quiet of my house. I had just rinsed my porcelain cup and set it in its place, the ceramic still warm from tea. The sound made me pause, the way a sudden knock at the door makes you catch your breath. I reached for the receiver, already knowing it would not be a friendly voice. "Hello, Sylvia," Claire said. Her tone was light, almost playful, but I heard the steel beneath. "I was just calling to see how you liked your birthday gift. Did you try the coffee yet?" Her words stretched like a rope, taut and expectant. My eyes moved to the clean counter where the box had sat less than a day ago. I felt the weight of the moment, but I answered with calm. "I passed it to your mother," I said. "She loved it." The line went silent, as if the house itself had inhaled and forgotten to exhale. I could hear the faint crackle of distance, the buzz of electricity running through the cord. My own breath filled the gap, slow and steady. Then it came. "You... what?" Her voice cracked, then rose, sharp enough to cut glass. "You gave it to her." She did not hide her outrage. I imagined her standing in her immaculate kitchen, hand pressed tight around her phone, knuckles white. The silence after her. Question throbbed. "Yes," I said softly. It seemed right. "My heart does not do well with coffee. Your mother adores it. Why let it sit unused here?" There was a sound on the other end, like a breath caught between anger and disbelief. The silence that followed was not empty. It pressed against me, thick, dangerous. It was not the pause of someone searching for words. It was the pause of someone calculating. I could hear the faint hum of her refrigerator in the background, or maybe it was mine. The cords blurred space. My pulse slowed, not quickened. I have learned that in moments of hostility, rushing is what betrays you. "You had no right," she hissed at last, her voice clipped. "That was for you, not for her. I chose it carefully." I rested my hand on the edge of the counter, cool tile beneath my palm. "Claire," I said evenly, "you gave me a gift. A gift is mine to give again if I choose. And I chose to bring joy where it belongs." The line burned with her silence again. My ears tuned to every small sound, the faint static, the occasional pop of the connection, my own measured breathing. Her silence was louder than her words. When she finally spoke, it came like a snap. "You don't understand what you've done." The words lingered, half threat, half lament. My skin prickled. For a moment, I smelled danger the way one smells smoke before seeing flames. I held my ground with stillness. "Perhaps not," I said quietly, "but I understand what peace feels like. Yesterday that box was a weight. Today it became light." The click of her sharp breath reached me. I pictured her lips pressed tight, eyes narrowing. Yet I did not fill the silence. I let it stand. Imbalance shifted in that gap. For once, I was not scrambling to smooth things over. Finally, she broke it, her tone high, strained. "Fine, if that's how you feel." The words were brittle. They carried no peace. And then she ended the call, the sharp click ringing in my ear long after the line went dead. I lowered the receiver, listening to the hollow dial tone that followed. It was almost like the ocean inside a seashell, except this ocean warned instead of comforted. In the empty house, the silence that remained was not ordinary. It pressed against the walls, folded into corners. I stood in the kitchen, hand still on the phone, and breathed through the tension that lingered. I thought of Helen, opening the box with childlike joy, and Claire's voice, sharp as a knife. Between those two images hung a truth I could not ignore. Kindness in one place, bitterness in another. I set the receiver down slowly, the way one sets down glass that might shatter. My hand trembled for just a moment, then stilled. I looked at the porcelain cup drying on the rack and whispered inside myself, if I had drunk it, would my heart still be beating now? The quiet after the call was not peace. It was warning. Yet in that warning, I discovered a strange kind of strength. I would not chase after her anger, nor bend myself into apologies that did not belong to me. I would let silence stand, the way a stone stands against the wind. The house exhaled then, finally, and I stood with it, The hospital smelled of antiseptic and faint plastic, a mixture that clung to my throat. I sat in the waiting area outside the emergency ward, the overhead fluorescent lights buzzing softly above me. They were too white, too steady, draining the warmth from the air. Everything here was cold. Even the chairs pressed their hardness against my bones as though they wanted to remind me that comfort had no place in this room. Helen had been admitted just an hour earlier, rushed in by ambulance after collapsing in her kitchen. Her neighbor had called me, panic running through her voice, and I had hurried here. Now I waited, my hands folded tight in my lap, the sound of the heart monitor drifting faintly through the door. Beep, beep, beep. That rhythm pierced me deeper than any words could. I thought back to the moment I had handed her the coffee box, the way her face had lit up, as though she had been given a treasure meant for someone else but delivered to her heart. She had hugged the box to her chest, her frail arms trembling with joy. I had smiled then, relieved to pass it on. Now, sitting under the sterile light, I felt the sharp edge of what-ifs. If the box had stayed in my home, if I had brewed even one cup, if I had let temptation win, would I be the one lying in that bed right now? The thought chilled me. I pictured myself on the gurney, tubes winding across my chest, the monitor declaring each beat of a failing heart. My hand went instinctively to my sternum, feeling the faint thud beneath my ribs, weak but steady, still mine. The door cracked open, and I saw Helen through the small window. She looked so small against the white sheets, wires attached to her skin, her breath rising unevenly. The monitor's beeping synchronized with her frailty, each note a reminder of how fragile life becomes when the body betrays us. I closed my eyes for a moment and listened. The hum of the light above me, the mechanical sigh of a ventilator nearby, the faint shuffle of nurses' shoes. Every sound became sharper, heavier. In that slow rhythm of the hospital, time stretched. Minutes felt like hours, each breath weighed by uncertainty. What if she doesn't make it? The question pulsed through me like another monitor, unseen but relentless. I whispered to myself, a truth no one else would hear. That coffee box could have been my coffin. The words sent a shiver down my spine. My decision, so quiet and almost careless at the time, had drawn a line between two fates, hers and mine. I remembered her joy again, the way she had cradled the box. For a moment, guilt pierced me. Had I transferred danger instead of delight? Had I unknowingly handed her harm? My heart clenched at the thought, and I pressed my hand tighter against my chest, grounding myself in the steady thump there. A nurse walked by and offered me a sympathetic smile, but she said nothing. Sometimes silence speaks louder than pity. I looked down at my hands, noticing the faint tremor in my fingers. I smoothed them against my skirt as if I could iron out the fear. The waiting stretched on. I counted the tiles on the ceiling, the seconds between the monitor's beeps, the breaths that shook my chest. I slowed my mind to meet the pace of the hospital, letting every detail etch itself into memory. The cold air brushing my skin, the taste of dryness in my mouth, the flicker of the fluorescent bulb in the far corner that refused to stay steady. And in that slow descent into awareness, fear crystallized into something else. Realization. If I had kept that box, no one would be sitting here for Helen. They would be here for me. Claire's gift had not been what it seemed. I was no fool. Something lay hidden in that coffee, something meant to harm. Helen's collapse, sudden and cruel, confirmed what my instincts had whispered. I leaned back in the chair, breath shallow, heart heavy. The sterile light pressed down on me, but beneath its glare I discovered a strange clarity. I was alive. Because of a choice that seemed trivial, a choice born from quiet defiance, from the simple act of refusing what I did not need. The monitor inside the room continued its steady chant, beep, beep, beep. Each sound carved itself into me. I promised myself then that I would not ignore the warning signs anymore. Claire's anger, her silence, her outburst, they were not about a simple gift. They were about control, about something darker. I sat straighter, letting the hard chair hold me. Fear remained, but alongside it grew resolve. I would not shrink into silence. I would not drink from cups handed to me with hidden blades. The hospital's light was harsh, but it revealed truth. And in that brightness, I saw the path ahead, watchful, steady, unafraid to name what I had almost lost, my life. I carried the porcelain cup carefully, wrapped in a dish towel as though I held something sacred or dangerous, or perhaps both. The rim still smelled faintly of roasted beans, but beneath that aroma lingered something acrid, metallic, a note that didn't belong. I knew I couldn't ignore it. That was why I drove across town to Daniel's place. Daniel Bennett had been my neighbor once, years ago, back when Michael was still a boy. He was a pharmacist for nearly 3 decades before retiring. Now he spent his time tending roses in his backyard and tinkering with small experiments in his garage. He greeted me with his warm, worn smile, his thinning gray hair sticking out beneath a baseball cap. "What brings you out here, Sylvia?" he asked, wiping his hands on a rag. "I need you to look at something," I said, setting the towel-wrapped cup on his workbench. "Please don't laugh. Just check it." He raised an eyebrow, curiosity piqued, and unwrapped the cup with careful fingers. The smell reached him immediately. I saw it in the way his nose twitched. He leaned down, sniffed once, then again, more slowly. His expression shifted, the casual, neighborly look replaced with professional alertness. He fetched a small notebook from the shelf, its pages already filled with neat handwriting. "All right, let's see what we have here." Daniel worked quietly, the way men do when they've repeated the same motions for years, until they become ritual. He scraped a faint residue from the bottom of the cup with a wooden stir stick, tapping the powder onto a glass slide. Then he added a few drops of water from a small pipette, swirled it gently, and dipped in a strip of pH paper. The strip turned an odd shade, neither the bright yellow of acidity nor the calm blue of something neutral. Instead, it bled into a murky green that made Daniel frown. He sniffed again, wrinkling his nose, then reached for another vial. "This doesn't smell like coffee," he muttered, half to himself. He sprinkled a pinch onto a flame spoon, held it over the Bunsen burner he kept for his gardening solutions. The powder flared with a sharp greenish hue, almost unnatural. He made a quick note in his book, bitter alkaloid scent, unusual burn. I sat stiff on the stool, watching his hands. Every movement was ordinary, dipping, lighting, noting, yet the air thickened with tension. My palms dampened against my skirt. Finally, he reached for a reference kit he had kept from his pharmacy days. He compared the reaction with the color chart, held it up against the light. His jaw tightened. "Sylvia," he said quietly, "this looks like traces of nightshade derivative. Not in lethal dose here, but enough to cause heart arrhythmia, dizziness, collapse." The words landed heavy, each one dragging down on me. My chest tightened. Nightshade. Poison. Not an accident. He continued, careful and measured. "I can't confirm percentages here without lab equipment, but I know the signs. This is deliberate. Someone wanted whoever drank this to be hurt, maybe worse." I couldn't breathe for a moment. The fluorescent lights in his garage flickered faintly, as if echoing the hospital bulbs from hours before. Helen's pale face flashed before me, the wires, the beeping monitor. If that cup had stayed in my kitchen, it would have been me. I steadied myself on the edge of the workbench, fingers curling against the wood grain. My voice, when it came, sounded low, almost foreign. "You're certain, Daniel?" "As certain as I can be without sending it off to a lab," he said. "Sylvia, I know you. You wouldn't come here unless you had a reason to worry. Trust your instincts. Something's wrong." He placed the notebook beside me, showing the neat scrawl, Solanezia, possible belladonna or derivative. I traced the ink with my finger, the letters blurring as my eyes burned. I thanked him, but the words felt too small. I wrapped the cup back in the towel, holding it as though it could still explode. On the drive home, the sun was setting, painting the sky with bruised colors, orange fading into purple, streaks of red bleeding into night. My heart beat in rhythm with the engine, steady but shaken. Each mile I drove, the truth sank deeper. This wasn't an accident, not a mistake, but intent. In the quiet of my car, I whispered to myself, "She wanted me gone." The words tasted bitter, heavier than the smell of that poisoned cup. And yet beneath the fear, a current of resolve stirred. I had handed away the danger once. Now I had proof that danger had been real. The next choice I made would not be silent. It would shape everything that came after. Daniel called the next morning and asked a simple question that felt heavier than it sounded. Could he look around the places where I kept household supplies? I said yes. The sun had not burned off the chill yet when he arrived with a small tote, latex gloves, and the same quiet focus he had in his garage. We started with my pantry, then the laundry room, and finally the garage, where Claire liked to help me organize. On weekends when Michael was busy, the garage smelled like oil and old cardboard. Light fell in slanted bars through the window, laying stripes across stacked boxes marked Winter, Paint, and Christmas. Claire had arranged most of these shelves last month. She had labeled everything with neat block letters and a smile that looked generous. I had thanked her. Gratitude is a habit in women like me. Daniel moved slowly. He checked the workbench, the pegboard hooks, the plastic bins where I keep rags and gardening gloves. He crouched by the lowest shelf and swept his flashlight along the concrete. Something caught the beam, a dull glint near the leg of the shelving unit. He reached for it with gloved fingers and set it gently on the bench. It was a small amber glass vial with a black screw cap. The label had been peeled, leaving a torn crescent of paper and a smear of adhesive. Inside, at the bottom, clung a whisper of beige powder. He did not speak right away. He tilted it, tapped it once. A dusting lifted and settled like tired snow. "Where did this come from?" he asked. "I have never seen it," I said, and the words tasted like metal. He sniffed the mouth carefully without touching it to his nose, then straightened and wrote in his notebook. He shone the flashlight across the shelf again. There was a faint ring on the wood, the kind a bottle leaves when it sits long enough to mark its place. Around that ring lay a constellation of tiny specks, pale and gritty, swept but not gone. Someone had tried to erase the scene and had been almost successful. Daniel found a zip bag, slid the vial inside, sealed it, and labeled the plastic with the date and time. He tapped the dust on the shelf with a strip of clear tape, folding the adhesive over itself to trap the grains. His voice stayed soft, but it carried weight. "If a lab tests this and it matches what was in your cup, we will have more than a hunch." I watched the careful way his hands moved. It reminded me of a different set of careful hands, years ago, in a bridal shop that smelled of starch and perfume. Claire had been standing on a platform in a white dress that refused to obey her. It needed more than pins. It needed permission. The price was more than she could bear, and I knew it the moment I heard her whisper into her phone in the hallway. She was trying to keep her voice from breaking. She said she would find a cheaper dress and pretend she had always wanted lace instead of silk. I walked to the desk and asked for a manager. I wrote a check from the savings I had guarded since Robert died. I told the woman to keep my name off the receipt. I did not want applause. I wanted family. When Claire stepped back into the room, the seamstress smiled and told her the boutique had made an adjustment. The dress was hers. Claire cried then. She hugged me quick and called me an angel. The word felt too big for me. I took it anyway, folded it quiet inside my chest. No one ever knew. I never told Michael. I carried that secret like a soft stone in my pocket, rubbing it when the house felt too empty. It was my way of saying welcome to her, even when her edges cut me. Love has a way of making excuses for sharp corners. Now Daniel held up the tape dust and the bagged vial. The fluorescent light above the bench hummed. The garage felt smaller, the air closer. I stared at the shelf Claire had labeled cleaning and saw the careless sweep of a cloth, the not quite finished job of a hurried hand. The betrayal did not shout. It stood there, modest and patient, waiting for me to name it. Daniel cleared his throat. "Sylvia, this does not prove everything, but it speaks. Whoever handled this knew what they were doing. Whoever handled this was here." "Here," I repeated, and my voice steadied. My garage, where she laughed about my old paint cans, where she pressed labels and said we were a team, where I thanked her for kindness that now felt like cover. I felt the weight of the bridal shop memory against the weight of the vial. Planting and payoff. I'd planted welcome, quiet, and costly. What bloomed in return was something poisonous. The math of it stunned me. Daniel put the evidence into his tote. "We should take this to the police. I will give a statement about the tests and what we found. You do not have to do this alone." "I will not," I said, and was surprised by how certain I sounded. He nodded and squeezed my shoulder through his glove. After he left, I stayed in the garage a while, listening to the tick of cooling metal and the faraway bark of a neighbor's dog. The labels glowed in the pale light. Winter, paint, Christmas. I reached up and peeled one back. Under paper, bare wood waited, clean, ready for a name that belonged. That night the house was silent, yet the silence felt restless. I carried my porcelain cup to the table, poured hot water over a tea bag, and watched the steam curl upward. I should have felt comfort in the routine, but the steam looked more like smoke from a small fire, one I could not decide whether to extinguish or let burn until everything was revealed. Michael's face floated in my mind. His boyish grin had not changed since he was 12, though now it sat on a man's jawline. I thought of the mornings he used to leave notes by my coffee cup before school, little scribbles that said, "Love you, Mom." The memory pressed against the image of him now, a husband defending a wife he believed in, perhaps blindly. Should I tell him what Daniel had found? Should I lay down the vial, the tape with its trapped powder, the notes of a retired pharmacist, and say, "Your wife wanted me gone"? The thought cut me in half. If I spoke, I risked shattering Michael's world. If I stayed quiet, I risked losing myself to fear. I opened my old leather-bound journal, the one Robert gave me for our 25th anniversary. The pages were yellowed, but the binding still strong. I dated the top corner and began to write. My hand trembled. The ink bled darker than usual. I wrote 3 short lines, spaced like prayers. "Choose my son. Choose the truth. Choose myself." I stared at the words until they blurred. What do you do when love and truth pull in opposite directions? What do you say first, the child you bore, or the self that bore him? The clock ticked louder than usual, each second an accusation. I set down my pen and leaned back, closing my eyes. In the darkness behind my eyelids, I heard Michael's laugh, soft as rain. And then I heard the sharp silence of Claire's pause on the phone, the moment before her voice had cracked into a scream. What if telling Michael now only made him turn away from me? What if he thought I was inventing stories, twisting accidents into intentions? Mothers are supposed to protect, not accuse. Wives are supposed to be trusted, not condemned by in-laws. I could already hear his voice saying, "Mom, you are imagining things." But I was not imagining. Daniel's notebook, the vial, the powder, it was all too concrete. My memory of Claire standing in my garage, labeling shelves, too recent. My heartbeat quickened as if it wanted me to decide tonight. I poured another cup of tea, though I had not finished the first. The porcelain clinked when I set it down, sharp and hollow. I whispered into the kitchen air, "Robert, what would you do?" No answer came, only the refrigerator hum. The thought struck me that truth is not kind, but it is steady. It will stand whether I choose it or not. If I keep it locked in my journal, it will rot in silence. If I speak it, it might tear Michael from me, but it will also free me from the burden of pretending. I ran my fingers across the 3 lines again. Choose my son. Choose the truth. Choose myself. My hand circled the last one slowly, as if I were giving myself permission to exist outside of motherhood, outside of obligation. I realized then that choosing myself did not mean losing Michael. It meant refusing to lose me. It meant standing tall in a storm even if lightning struck. For decades, I had placed myself last in the family's line. Maybe it was time to step into the center, not with rage, but with quiet certainty. I closed the journal, pressing my palm against the cover like sealing a vow. Tomorrow would come, and with it, another decision. But tonight I allowed myself to sit with the conflict, raw and unresolved, because sometimes the hardest truth is not spoken aloud but admitted inward first. The tea had gone cold. I lifted the cup anyway and drank it in silence, tasting bitterness that was not from the leaves. The silence grew around me, not empty, but waiting. Somewhere in that stillness, I knew the answer would find me. The kitchen was too bright that afternoon, as if the sunlight itself wanted to witness what would unfold. Claire leaned against the counter, arms folded, her smile practiced into something sweet but sharpened at the edges. She spoke in a voice that pretended to be soft, but every syllable had a thorn. "You know, Sylvia," she began, tilting her head slightly, "sometimes I wonder if you take things too personally. A gift is just a gift. Maybe you misunderstood." Her tone was syrup layered over steel. She wanted to poke, to make me stumble, to paint me as fragile. I listened without moving, my hand curled lightly around the handle of my white porcelain cup. I felt the faint tremor of my pulse in the ceramic. I set the cup down on the table. The sound was small but rang clear, a single note that split the silence. Her words faltered, caught in that echo. I lifted my eyes to hers and spoke, not loud, not rushed, but steady. "On your wedding day, the white dress you wore, the one everyone admired, I paid for it. All of it." Her smile froze, a mask with a crack running down the middle. She blinked, as if she had misheard. Then she tried to laugh, but it came out brittle. "You must be mistaken," she said too quickly. "No," I said, letting the truth stand naked between us. "I wrote the check. I handed it quietly to the seamstress because I wanted you to shine. Nobody else needed to know." Her throat bobbed. She pressed her palm to the counter as if steadying herself. The sweetness in her voice vanished for a heartbeat, replaced by a flicker of something raw. Surprise. Maybe even guilt. She had not expected me to hold such a truth, hidden all these years. I did not push further. I let the silence expand, thick and alive. I could hear the faint tick of the kitchen clock, the hum of the refrigerator, the shallow hitch in her breathing. I gave her nothing to fight against. No raised voice, no angry accusation, just the weight of what I had revealed. She fumbled for her mask again, forcing a smile, her eyes darting as if searching for higher ground. "That was very generous of you," she said, the words clumsy in her mouth. I nodded once, but I did not smile back. I kept my gaze steady, my silence louder than any reply. It unnerved her more than shouting ever could. She shifted her stance, uncrossed and recrossed her arms, cleared her throat. The power in that moment was not in what I had said, but in what I chose not to say. I did not tell her I knew about the garage, about the vial, about the powder Daniel had tested. I did not speak of the hospital lights above Helen or the monitor that counted her failing heartbeat. I let her sit in the knowledge that I carried truths she had not expected, truths she could not spin or smother. Her eyes flickered to the cup I had set on the table, as if the porcelain itself accused her. The sunlight slanted across her face, too harsh now, washing away the pretense of her sweetness. For the first time, she looked uncertain. I turned slightly, my hand brushing the chair back, and I let my silence stretch a breath longer, heavy as stone. I felt a calmness settle over me, the kind that comes when you stop playing someone else's game. Finally, I spoke, my voice quiet, almost tender. You should know, Claire. Not every kindness is forgotten. Not every silence is ignorance. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. Her hands tightened on the counter edge. The clock ticked louder, counting seconds she could not claim. I left the porcelain cup where it was and walked toward the door. My footsteps were unhurried, each one deliberate. Behind me, the kitchen was filled with the sound of nothing, an emptiness that pressed harder than any words I might have thrown. I knew then that I had shifted something. She was no longer sure of the ground beneath her, and me. I had taken back a measure of power, not through anger, but through truth, wrapped in silence. The table was set with care, though I kept the dishes simple. Roasted chicken, steamed vegetables, and a loaf of bread I had baked that morning. The kind of meal that once meant family gathered in warmth, not in quiet calculation. The glow of the dining room light spilled across the polished wood, making every fork and knife gleam a little too bright. Michael sat across from me, shifting in his chair with a faint restlessness, his tie slightly loosened as though even the fabric around his neck was too tight. Claire took her seat beside him, her movements composed, her smile just polite enough to pass for sincerity. I watched them both as I poured the tea, chamomile, pale gold, steaming softly. I placed my porcelain cup in front of me, then slid a cup toward Michael. He accepted it with a nod. I noticed how his hands lingered on the warm ceramic, almost grateful for something solid to hold. When I reached for Claire's cup, she lifted her hand, stopping me gently. "No tea for me," she said. "I'll just have water." Her voice was calm, but her eyes flickered for the briefest moment toward the untouched coffee tin on the counter. She had noticed, of course, that it remained sealed, untouched, in plain sight. I did not comment. I only poured the water and returned to my seat, letting the silence fall naturally. It stretched like a taut string, humming with tension no one wanted to name. We began to eat. The clink of silverware against plates filled the air, too loud in the absence of conversation. Michael cleared his throat once, twice, as though words might come, but then decided against it. Claire, however, filled the gaps, her tone light, her questions casual yet too precise. "Sylvia, how have you been feeling these days? Sleeping well? Your heart hasn't given you trouble, has it?" Her eyes rested on me longer than necessary, as if searching for weakness. I lifted my cup, inhaled the gentle scent of chamomile, and took a slow sip before answering. "I sleep fine with the tea. It soothes more than coffee ever could." Michael glanced up at that, caught in the middle, his fork pausing in the air. Claire smiled, but it was tight, the corners of her mouth straining. "Yes," she said, her tone a shade too sweet. "Tea is safer." I met her gaze directly, then looked down again at my plate, saying nothing. It was not my words, but my silence that unsettled her. The space between sentences weighed more than any accusation could. Michael shifted again, breaking a piece of bread with unnecessary force. "Mom, the chicken is really good," he offered, trying to ease the room. I thanked him softly, keeping my eyes on my meal. Claire pressed on, her questions circling closer, sharp beneath their polite surface. "Did you try the coffee I gave you? I picked it out myself. Special, really." I let a beat of silence pass, letting her feel the weight of her own words, before I answered with calm precision. "No," I said, lifting the cup of tea again. "I prefer this." Her hand froze on the stem of her glass. Michael's brow furrowed, a crease forming between his eyes as he looked from me to her, sensing something beneath the surface he could not quite name. The tea steam curled upward, soft and steady. The porcelain cup warmed my fingers, its familiar weight grounding me. Across the table, Claire's smile flickered again, her mask slipping, then reappearing as if stitched back hastily. I said little. I didn't need to. The room itself was heavy with all that remained unspoken. Michael's eyes darted between us, confusion plain. Claire stirred her water glass, though there was nothing to stir, and I simply sat, letting the silence do its work. The meal carried on, each bite punctuated by glances and pauses. Words became scarce, stripped down to their bones. A simple, "pass the salt," a murmur of thanks. Yet beneath it all, tension threaded through like a current, waiting to snap. When at last I set my fork down and folded my hands around the cup, I felt the steadiness in my chest, the calm I had chosen. Claire's eyes lingered on me, sharp, searching, but I gave her nothing to hold. My silence spoke for me. That night, dinner ended not with laughter, not with warmth, but with 3 people leaving the table more unsettled than when they had sat down. And in that quiet space, I knew something had shifted. Power no longer sat where she expected it to. It rested silently in my hands. Detectives moved quietly as if the case preferred soft shoes. Daniel and I turned over the porcelain cup, the tape dust, and the amber vial. The officer labeled each item with time and date, my name spelled right. No speeches, just forms sliding across a counter. They assigned Detective Mara Collins, compact and steady-eyed. She met me in a small room, walls off-white, table bare, but for a recorder and a pad. She listened, asked for the order of things, then drew a line down her page. "Sequence first," she said. It steadied me. First, my birthday. Second, the call. Third, Helen's collapse under fluorescent lights. Fourth, Daniel's tests. Fifth, the find in my garage. I said each piece while she wrote the timestamps I remembered. When I faltered, she waited, pen hovering, time a door she could hold open. She asked to contact the hospital. I agreed. She asked me not to contact Claire. I agreed again. Truth can walk on its own 2 feet, she said, almost to herself. Then she gathered the forms and left me with vent noise and a paper cup that tasted of metal. By evening, she called with confirmation. Hospital charts noted arrhythmia, sudden onset. Labs suggested exposure to plant alkaloid, enough to ask a judge for data preservation. "Tonight we freeze the clocks," she said. Phones, cloud, search history. Morning, 7:42 a.m., she texted. Warrant signed. By noon, a forensic unit imaged Claire's phone and pulled her cloud backups. Collins gave me only the times. 12:18 p.m., extraction began. 2:03 p.m., preview complete. 3:11 p.m., first hit. She read it to me, voice even. The night before my birthday, 9:07 p.m., a search in Claire's browser. How much nightshade kills quickly? At 9:12, another. Mask bitter taste in coffee. At 9:19, arrhythmia elderly symptoms. Each query dropped like a stone into clear water. I was in my kitchen when she called, my teapot whistling. I turned the burner off and let the steam fade. I slid a finger along the cup, then set it down. "Thank you," I said, meaning both the word and the pause. Detectives do not build cases from words. They build them from time. She kept reading. On my birthday at 4:26 p.m., a message from Claire to a contact saved as Garden Girl. It's wrapped. Delivery tomorrow. At 10:41 a.m. the next day, 5 minutes after her call to me, another text. She gave it away. 1 minute later, to her mother. No reply. The thread ended in silence. Collins marked the chain like steps on a stair. Search intent, package, call, collapse, powder. Vials. Could see the line in her notebook growing darker with every detail. At 5:15 p.m. she called again. We also found draft notes in a shopping app, she said. Grind fine, mix after cooling, rinse grinder, twice. The draft saved at 8:02 a.m., the morning of my birthday. She did not embellish or need to. I asked about Helen. Stable, she said. Doctors expect a slow recovery. Relief came like a soft tide, not dramatic, just merciful. I thanked her, sat with the quiet until the refrigerator cycled off and the house held its breath. Collins's final call that night was brief. We're preparing an affidavit, she said. Keep your routines, lock your doors. Do not meet Claire alone. I wrote the time in my journal, looping the numbers. 9:34 p.m. When I closed the book, the page before it stared up at me. Choose my son. Choose the truth. Choose myself. The words no longer competed. The clock had sorted them. Truth had found its legs, and I had found mine. I washed my cup, dried it, and set it on its saucer. I placed the saucer gently, hearing porcelain answer with calm. Once, the window showed a thin ribbon of moon pale against the dark. Somewhere a siren rose and fell. Somewhere a detective checked a box on a form. In my house, a kettle cooled. What mattered, finally, was the order. The night before my birthday, a search. The day of, a package. The day after, a call. Then the beeping of a monitor beneath lights that did not blink. The line was straight. It did not need my anger to stand. It only needed time and the willingness to see. The night had a stillness that pressed against the windows, as if the world itself waited for my son's breath. Michael sat at my kitchen table, the chair too small for his broad frame, his hands restless. Detective Collins had left only an hour earlier, after reading out the sequence of evidence, search histories, texts, drafts. I had asked her not to stay for this part. It needed to be only him and me. Michael rubbed his temples, elbows on the table, as though the weight of proof had been poured straight into his skull. His wedding ring caught the light each time his fingers trembled. He did not look at me at first. He looked at the cup between us, the white porcelain resting quietly on its saucer. The same cup that had nearly been my grave. I don't know what to do, he whispered. His voice cracked as though every word had to cut itself free. It feels like everything I built is split down the middle. A wife I swore to protect, a mother who's always been here, and the evidence? His voice dissolved. He pressed his face into his palms. I stayed silent, my breath even, my spine upright. He needed the room to break. When he raised his head, his eyes were wet, cheeks blotched red. He looked years younger in that grief, like the boy who once skinned his knees and ran to me with both arms wide. Claire, she told me once you were dramatic, that you exaggerated your health. I defended her. I thought I was being a good husband, but now... He stopped, fists clenched, jaw tight. Now I see I wasn't being a good son. The kettle on the stove clicked as the metal cooled. That small sound filled the air between us until he spoke again. Mom, he said, the word trembling. One side is my wife, the other is my mother. But when I really look, only my mother never left me. Only you never turned away. His shoulders buckled as the admission broke free. I can't believe what she did. I can't believe I didn't see it. I reached across the table. My hand, lined with years, rested on his shoulder. No speeches, no blame, no scolding. Just the warmth of touch, steady as breath. His sobbing deepened, the kind of sobs that shake a body until it feels emptied. I let them wash over the kitchen because catharsis comes like a tide. You cannot force it back. You can only let it spend itself. I don't deserve you, he whispered into the space between sobs. I don't deserve a mother who still puts her hand on my shoulder after all the ways I've doubted her. I squeezed gently, not letting go. My silence carried the weight his words could not. Love doesn't vanish because it is tested. It simply waits, like porcelain waiting for the hand that knows its shape. His head lowered until his forehead touched the table. I kept thinking, marriage vows mean loyalty. But what about the vow I never said aloud? That I'd stand by the woman who raised me, who bought me crayons when I couldn't afford paper, who sat up all night when I was sick. Isn't that the truest vow? His voice cracked into a sob again. My throat ached, but I did not let tears fall yet. This was his moment, his breaking, his cleansing. My role was to hold the silence like a vessel. Finally, he raised his head, eyes swollen, voice hoarse. You never left me, Mom. Even when I left you in small ways, even when I didn't notice the loneliness in your eyes at birthdays, even when I thought she was right. He pressed his palm flat on the table, close to mine. You never left. I nodded once. My lips pressed tight to hold in the storm inside me. The words echoed, striking deeper than any knife. Mother never left. They rang with the same cadence as years passed when he whispered into my neck after nightmares, Don't leave, Mom. Now the circle closed. He remembered. The kitchen light glowed above us, pale yellow on wood and porcelain. No thunderclap, no gavel, just the truth, bare and undeniable. A wife had betrayed him. A mother had not. Between the two, he saw clearly for the first time. I held his hand. His grip was desperate, but I let it be. Together we sat as grief drained from him, and silence wrapped us both like a blanket. No words could ease what he had lost, but words were not needed. What he had rediscovered was enough. Catharsis lived there, in the quiet. His tears, my touch, and the echo that tethered us to the years before betrayal. Mother does not leave, not even now. I used to think villains were monsters you could spot from a distance, their eyes cold, their words sharp, their intentions unmistakable. But what I learned with Claire was far more unsettling. Villains can smile at the dinner table, share blankets on family trips, and kiss your son's cheek as though they truly loved him. They can live in the same house of trust and yet quietly sharpen a blade meant for your back. The detectives told me what Claire finally admitted when the weight of evidence left her no escape. She had debts, credit cards maxed out, payday loans disguised as business ventures. What she spent it on was less clear. Some whispered about investments gone wrong, others about appearances she could not afford. To her, the numbers were always looming, the creditors breathing down her neck. But money alone does not drive someone to lace poison into a gift. Money explains panic. It does not explain betrayal. When I closed my eyes, I could hear her words, fragments from past conversations that now carried new weight. Michael works so hard, doesn't he? She would say, and then add with a half smile, but it must be nice having his mother's attention too. I thought it was a joke, but under that humor lived bitterness. She saw me not as family, but as competition. Claire confessed she felt invisible in her own marriage. Every time Michael mentioned me, she heard a comparison, even if none was spoken. If I cooked soup when he was sick, it was proof to her that she could never measure up. If I remembered his favorite childhood story, she saw herself erased. My existence became her shadow, and she feared he would always live in my light. It is strange to be hated for love. I never tried to steal my son back. I only stood where I always had, by his side quietly. But to Claire, that quietness was a threat. She saw Michael's loyalty as a rope pulled in two directions, and the more she tugged, the more she feared the rope would snap, leaving her alone. So she twisted logic into something that fit her fear. She told herself I was the obstacle to her happiness, that if I were gone, Michael would be hers completely. Poison became her solution, a permanent erasure of what she thought was my hold. It was not madness. It was desperation hardened into cruelty. Hearing her reasoning did not lessen the sting. It deepened it. because buried inside her words was something painfully human. The need to belong, the terror of being second best, the loneliness of feeling unseen. I could almost pity her, if not for the bitterness of what she had done. She turned her insecurity into violence, her longing into an act that nearly shattered every bond she claimed to protect. I remembered the day of their wedding. She stood in her dress, veil trembling in the breeze, and I thought she looked radiant. I never told her then that I paid for that gown, choosing silence so she could have her pride. And still, years later, she believed I was her enemy. How fragile some hearts are, how easily love becomes distorted when fear feeds it. The truth is, Claire was not born a villain. She became one through choices made in shadows, each debt ignored, each bitterness fed, each fear left to fester. And yet she had another choice all along. She could have spoken. She could have reached for me, not against me. I would have listened. I would have helped. That is what makes her betrayal cut deepest of all. She had other paths, but she chose the darkest. As I sat with these revelations, I realized the story was not only about poison in a cup, it was about poison in a heart. Claire carried hers quietly until it spilled out into mine. And though I survived, part of me mourned, not only for the danger I faced, but for the woman she might have been had she chosen light instead of shadow. That night, I whispered a prayer into the quiet, not for her forgiveness, but for understanding. Because villains are not always monsters. Sometimes they are broken people who let fear win. And fear, when fed long enough, can be deadly. The courthouse smelled faintly of dust and old wood polish, the kind of scent that carries centuries of judgment and finality. I sat on the narrow bench, my palms resting against my skirt, the cool fabric grounding me. My heart beat steady, not wild because by then I had nothing left to prove, only truth to state. When the clerk called my name, I stood, my legs calm, my steps unhurried. The room seemed larger than it was. Fluorescent lights hummed above, their buzz filling every quiet space. I took the stand and looked neither at Claire nor at Michael. I looked at the judge, at the weight of law carved into his chair, and I answered questions simply. No drama, no speeches, just the truth. Yes, I received the gift box of specialty coffee for my 67th birthday. Yes, I passed it to Mrs. Helen because of my heart condition. Yes, she was hospitalized shortly after drinking it. Each word landed softly, but they held the gravity of survival. I did not embellish. I did not accuse. I told the story as it happened, as plain as a calendar page. The attorney tried to press for more, but I returned to silence when the facts ended. Silence can be stronger than any performance. When Claire's turn came, the silence fractured. She shouted, her voice trembling, raw. "She's lying! She's always wanted to keep Michael. She poisoned her against me." The words ricocheted across the room, thin and jagged. I did not flinch. She pointed at me as if her finger could pierce skin. "It was never me. It was her. She wants me gone. She's hated me since day one." The courtroom absorbed her fury like stone absorbs rain. It left no mark. The judge raised his hand once, commanding order, but Claire would not stop. Her words unraveled, spiraling, until even Michael lowered his gaze. The sound of her voice cracked under its own weight, desperation replacing defiance. And then it came, the sharp wooden crack of the gavel, 3 strikes curt and unyielding. The sound sliced the air, ending her storm. That sound was more final than any sentence read aloud. It carried the authority of centuries. It said, "Enough." I lowered my eyes, not out of shame, but to center myself. My mind drifted unexpectedly to the porcelain teacup waiting at home, the white one, chipped at the rim, that had become my anchor through this ordeal. I pictured it on the table, catching a ray of soft morning light, and I thought, Be yourself, Sylvia. Be steady. Do not let fury bend you. So I stayed quiet. The judge looked at me once, perhaps expecting a rebuttal, but I offered none. My silence was the only statement left to make. In that room filled with noise, my calm was louder than anything Claire could scream. When the gavel fell a final time, signaling recess, I stepped down from the stand. My shoes clicked softly against the tile, each step carrying me closer to the door. Claire still shouted, though her words blurred into echoes. The officers moved closer to her side, firm hands resting near her arms. I did not look back. The sound of the gavel followed me into the hall, still reverberating, still steady. For me, the trial was not about winning. It was about enduring. And endurance, I realized, is not noisy. It is quiet as breath, strong as stone, simple as truth, spoken without adornment. The next morning, the courthouse steps were glazed with frost. My breath rose in faint clouds as I walked beside Michael. He said nothing. His silence was a wound and a shield both. Inside, the verdict had been read. Guilty of attempted poisoning. Bail denied. The judge's voice was firm, but not cruel. Just a decree spoken into air. I did not feel triumph. I felt weary, as though every muscle had carried a burden too heavy, for too long. Justice, they say, is blind, but justice is also not tender. It gives answers without healing. The gavel may have fallen in my favor, but the cracks in our family remain jagged, unsealed. Claire sat stiff when the ruling came down, her face drained of all fire. She did not scream this time. She looked at the floor as though searching for a door that did not exist. Michael sat 2 rows behind her, his body bowed as though in prayer. When the officer led Claire away, he did not move. He did not even lift his head. On the courthouse steps, the winter wind gripped my wrist like a cold bracelet. I pulled my coat tighter, but the chill seeped through. People walked past us, lawyers, clerks, strangers, each absorbed in their own rhythm, untouched by what had broken inside me. Michael finally whispered, "I don't know what to feel, Mom." His voice cracked at the edges. I laid my hand on his sleeve. I had no wisdom to offer, no words to mend the wound, only presence, only the quiet truth that I was still here, and she was not. I wanted to tell him, there is no peace in punishment. There is only space created where danger once stood. That space is empty, and emptiness is not victory. But I let the thought stay inside me. Some truths do not need to be spoken. We stood there for a long while, the cold biting deeper, until finally he looked at me. His eyes held grief and guilt, and something softer too, a recognition. He knew I had carried him even when he leaned the other way. That knowing was enough. When we finally walked down the steps, I did not feel lighter. I felt changed, as though I carried a scar beneath my ribs, not visible, but permanent. My life had been measured, tested, and rearranged. And though I had survived, survival is not the same as healing. That night at home, I sat at the table with the porcelain cup before me. The house was still. I poured chamomile tea, watched the steam rise, and wrapped my hands around the warm curve of the cup. The verdict had ended a chapter, yes, but it had not ended the ache. Outside, the wind pressed against the windows, restless. Inside, I took a sip and let the quiet settle. Sometimes justice leaves only a hollow echo, but in that echo, I promised myself, I will not let bitterness take root. I will not let her shadow linger longer than it must. The cup was warm, my heart was tired, the night was long, but I was still here, and being here, despite it all, was enough. The weeks after the verdict moved slowly, as though time itself limped forward. At first I stayed inside, paralyzed by silence. The house felt hollow. Each creak in the floorboards reminded me of what had been lost. Yet one morning, as I lifted my porcelain cup and watched chamomile steam rise, I whispered aloud, "Get up, Sylvia." The words were simple, but they felt like a command. I put on my old walking shoes, the soles worn thin, and stepped outside. The air was sharp, carrying the smell of wet leaves and earth. At first my body resisted, my knees stiff, my breath shallow. But step by step, block by block, I kept moving. The rhythm of my feet on pavement became a kind of prayer, steady and grounding. I found myself noticing details I had ignored before. The way the morning sun painted roofs gold, the laughter of children waiting for their school bus, the warmth of a neighbor's wave. Soon I joined the library's book club. I hadn't sat among strangers in years, yet there I was, listening to voices discuss novels and characters. At first I spoke little, my throat tight. But then someone asked what I thought of a story's ending, and words slipped out before I could retreat. They nodded, smiled, and welcomed me into the circle. For the first time in months, I felt part of something that wasn't defined by suspicion or pain. Another week, I signed up for a watercolor class at the community center. The brushes trembled in my hand, hesitant. I hadn't painted since Michael was a child, since we sat together with cheap crayons and paper placemats. My first attempt was clumsy, blue bleeding into green, shapes distorted, but the colors glowed soft under the light. And I remembered how it felt to create without fear, to let beauty rise from small strokes. Each new habit wove itself into my days, steady as breath, walking, reading, painting. Bit by bit, life rebuilt itself, not with grand victories, but with quiet rituals. And always the porcelain cup remained. Once it had threatened to carry poison into my veins. Now it carried only chamomile, fragrant and golden, a choice I made each night before bed. It was no longer just a vessel. It was a declaration. I chose health. I chose dignity. I chose to stay alive, not only in body but in spirit. There were moments when grief threatened to pull me under again. At the grocery store where I passed by the coffee aisle, at family photos where Claire's absence gaped like a wound, but I held on to the ritual. The cup, the tea, the slow inhale and exhale. These small anchors reminded me that I had endured. I began to write a phrase in my journal before sleep. Being myself is enough. The words became a refrain, echoing back each time doubt crept in. I had lost much, yes, but what remained was still precious. And in that recognition, I found something new, a strength I had not known I carried. Renewal, I realized, does not arrive like thunder. It whispers, steady as steam, rising from a simple cup. One evening, the house was bathed in amber light, the kind that lingers just before dusk. I sat at my dining table with my journal open, the lined pages waiting. My pen hovered, uncertain, until I finally pressed ink to paper. I have lost much, I wrote, the words plain, unornamented, but I still have myself, and that is enough. I let the sentence sit there, stark and unapologetic. My hand trembled, not from weakness, but from release. Writing it felt like exhaling after holding my breath too long. I lifted my eyes, and across the room hung the photograph in its simple wooden frame. My late husband stood beside me, his hand resting gently on my shoulder. In my arms was little Michael, grinning with milk teeth, clutching a porcelain cup almost too big for his hands. The image was ordinary, yet it glowed with a warmth that filled the room. I studied that picture for a long time. The circle of memory had closed. The same cup that had once carried milk for a boy now held tea for an older woman. The same vessel had traveled through innocence, danger, and healing. In its continuity, I saw my own story, not broken, not perfect, but whole. The room was silent except for the rustle of the pages as I wrote more. I did not write about Claire, nor about the trial, nor about the fear. Those things no longer deserved space here. Instead, I wrote about walking under trees, about the book club's laughter, about the way colors bled into each other on watercolor paper. I wrote about chamomile steam rising like hope. The act of writing became its own ritual, one final stitch in the fabric of renewal. My pen moved, slowly, deliberately, as though each word was a seed planted in soil. I did not rush. Healing cannot be rushed. I simply allowed the sentences to form, one after another, until the page carried the weight of my truth. When I finished, I closed the journal gently and set my hand on the cover. The photograph on the wall, the cup on the table, the journal beneath my palm, they aligned like a constellation, guiding me toward a life no longer defined by loss. I whispered softly, not to anyone else, but to myself, "You are still here. You are enough." And in that whisper, I felt peace settle in, not the fragile peace of denial, but the steady peace of acceptance. The circle of memory closed, not with sorrow, but with quiet strength. The house was quiet. My heart was quiet. I had come home to myself. I want to leave you with something, a thought that rests heavy on my heart. If you have listened this far, then perhaps you know what it feels like to be dismissed, to be doubted, or to be quietly hurt by someone you trusted. Perhaps you know what it means to carry both fear and love in the same chest, wondering which will break you first. So I will ask you gently, the way I would ask an old friend across a table, do you think I was wrong? Was I mistaken to pass that coffee along, or to sit silent when the truth pressed against my lips? Tell me in the comments if you've ever stood at a similar crossroads, if you've ever had to choose between protecting yourself and protecting someone you love. I want to hear your voice, because the truth is, no one else should ever decide the warmth in your cup. That choice belongs to you and you alone. Whether you fill it with coffee, tea, or nothing at all, it should carry your decision, not someone else's shadow. That small right to choose what you put into your body, into your spirit, is the foundation of dignity. Before we say goodbye, I would love to know, where are you watching from? Is it a quiet morning with a warm cup in your hand, steam rising as you begin your day? Or is it late at night, the world around you still, while stories like mine keep you company in the silence? Wherever you are, I hope you feel less alone here. Please let us know in the comments. We read each one with gratitude, as though they are letters folded into envelopes, carried from your home to mine. And if this story touched your heart, I ask, consider subscribing to this channel, not only to hear more stories like this, but to be part of a community that still believes in kindness, in healing, and in second chances. Together, we hold on to the fragile, necessary truth that life can still turn gentle after pain. I thank you for spending your time with me today. You could have chosen anything else, yet you chose to sit with my voice, my memory, my survival. That is no small gift. I do not take it lightly. Wherever you are, whether in a bustling city or a quiet town, whether your house is full of noise or marked by silence, I hope you carry this story with you. I hope it serves as a reminder that sometimes the miracle does not arrive with a knock at your door. Sometimes it waits quietly, patient, until you are ready to open your heart and let it in. And so I leave you with this. Hold on to one warm cup for yourself. Guard it. Cherish it. It is your right. It is your anchor. In a world that often pulls at us, demanding pieces we cannot afford to give, remember this small but powerful truth. Keeping one cup of warmth for yourself is not selfish. It is survival. It is love. Take care, my friend. Until the next story, may you find peace in small rituals. May you discover strength in your own silence. And may you never forget, you are enough, just as you are.